Hey vinyl community, welcome back to Dad's on a Budget Vinyl. My name is Mark. Appreciate you coming by, hanging out, spending some time. It's been a long day, but we're gonna unwind and talk about a little music, talk about a little art, some memories, that type of thing. Got me a good old sweet tea poured and ready to spend some time. So, the title of this video is My Vinyl Story. And, I'm a Southerner, so I love a good story, but I remember when I was a young teenager and I had subscribed to Rolling Stone magazine, and a new issue would come, and I couldn't wait to read the reviews. And I loved to read, what was compared to what else, and always an opportunity to discover, some new music and that type of thing. Um, also love to read the interviews, and I'd love to read artists talk about the music that they heard that made them want to get into music, or the instrument that they fell in love with, or the solo that they fell in love that made them want to play an instrument or write a song, or whatever. I love that type of stuff. I love backstories, and that's one of the things that I love about some of y'all's video channels, is that you connect the music to a particular time in your life and a story and that type of thing. And I think most of us have a story about how we became vinyl junkies. And I have said, in videos before, I'm a music lover first and a vinyl collector second. And what I mean by that is that if I can find the vinyl and it's affordable and that type of thing, it is definitely my preferred medium. We'll talk a little bit more about why that is, but if it's $100 for the vinyl, and I can pick up the CD for 3 or 4, then yeah, it's pretty obvious which way I'm going, because the name of my channel is Dad's on a Budget Vinyl, right? Um, my vinyl story. I grew up. Was born in 1965, and I was the youngest of five. I had two older sisters and two older brothers. However, I was an unplanned pregnancy. By the time I came along, my closest sibling, Laurie, was 10 years older than me. Jan's 13 years older than me. Ronnie was 17 years older, and Robbie was 19 or 20 years older than me. So by the time, I was 7, 8, 9 years old, everybody had flown the coop either to college or Vietnam and back, or all kinds of different stuff, right? But by the time I was about 8 years old, it was pretty much just me and my mom in our house. And the house that I grew up in was designed and built in 1937 by my mom's older sister, that I never had an opportunity to meet. But it was a funky house. It was full of closets and attics and alcoves and little doors that led, Lord knows where, and that type of thing. And just like most kids in the '70s, early '70s, I grew up outside playing in Army and GI Joes and all that kind of stuff. But um, I guess one reason that I became such a voracious reader, it was just me and my mom. I didn't have any neighborhood buddies or anything like that. We kind of lived off of a little bit of ways from the neighborhood proper, and I'll talk a little bit more about that too. But so anyway, one day I had gotten rained out, and went digging through a closet or one of those little alcoves or whatever, looking for something to do or something to find or get into or whatever. And I found a stack of records. And these were, I'm guessing, my sister's records and maybe some of their boyfriends or that type of thing. But in that stack, there was like a Steppenwolf record and a Vanilla Fudge record and maybe a Moody Blues record. But as I'm flipping through them, none of those really meant anything to me. I'd never heard any of those bands as a kid. I was flipping through them, and I came across a record that visually I thought was stunning. And I pulled it out and started looking at the cover and checking it out, and I was like, wow. And so we had a little console stereo downstairs in the living room, wood cabinet with a little, stereo receiver, little turntable, a couple of speakers built in, and that type of thing. And I took that record down and put it on. Let me go ahead, and you guys probably can guess. It was this record. Sergeant Pepper's, and that iconic cover, that beautiful cover with all of those iconic faces. I didn't know who any of those people were. So anyway, I took this record down. Of course, it wasn't this copy. The copy that I was listening to was pretty beat up, and we're talking 72, and it had come out in 67. So obviously, it had been really listened to and well played. Went downstairs, put the record on, started listening to the music. Uh, by the time we got to, or by the time I got to, with a little help from my friends, I had a magnifying glass out, and as I was listening to the music, I'd look at these faces, wondering who they were. I don't think there's anybody in '72 that didn't know who the Beatles, or at least know of the Beatles. When I was a kid, I didn't know any of their music. I didn't know anything. I just knew that this was a really cool looking record. And from the moment that the needle dropped on Sergeant Pepper's, I was kind of hooked, and I thought it was wonderful. The lyrics are on the back, and so I could sing along. And I guess probably by the time I was 8 years old, I knew the lyrics back and forward, and absolutely loved it. And several things happened all at one time. First of all, I realized that I guess maybe without even realizing it, that vinyl records are a really cool visual medium. Okay, I mean they're just gorgeous. Really cool. I think so, and I guess anybody watching this probably thinks so. Number two, the music. And I look at my tastes now and how kind of eclectic they are and slightly weird. And I look back to this record. So, you've got rock and roll. I mean, somebody's probably snickering right now saying the Beatles rock and roll. But yeah, Sergeant Pepper's 8-year old, that rocks, man. Um, but you've got show tunes like When I'm 64. You've got pop tunes like She's Leaving Home and Lovely Rita, and you've got slightly avant-garde psychedelic type of stuff with for the benefit of Mr. Kite, and you've got kind of the artsiness of A Day in the Life. You've got the world music vibe of Within You Without You, the George Harrison song with the sitar and all of that. And with this one little record, right? Um, I just probably the seeds of the taste for six or five or six different types of music was planted with that record, and I loved it. But that was pretty much it. I mean, as a kid, I wasn't even getting an allowance yet. I didn't. I just but I loved this record, and I played it over and over and over again. Um, but that was kind of pretty much it until maybe a couple of months later. And we lived on a hill, and you'd have to go up the hill and down and then back over and around till you got to like the proper neighborhood. Our house had been built in '37. The neighborhood had been built in the early '60s. You know, wood frame versus brick, and that type of thing. I think most of the kids in that neighborhood thought that my house was haunted. But anyway, I didn't have any little buddies until I'm probably like 10 years old, and I'm outside and I'm picking up trash up and down this hill. My mom hated litter, and I did too, and still do to this day. And I go out there and pick up trash just to kind of make some brownie points with her. And this kid comes squealing up on his Schwinn, chopper handlebars, banana seat, the whole schlemiel. And that was Brad. He's like, "Hey man, what are you doing?" "Picking up trash." And he was like, "Hey, you wanna come play at my house?" And I was like, "Yeah." I dropped that trash bag, hopped on my bike, and we went over the hill and down to the neighborhood. And there's Brad's house. And wow, man, I mean, I was blown away. I mean, his house had central heat and air and carpet and Pepsi Colas in the fridge and Totino's in the freezer, and I just was like, wow. His mom, Miss Sandra, probably wondered at some point over the rest of the next couple of summers, when's this kid ever going to leave? But I love being over there. that day we played with Planet of the Apes guys and Star Trek guys and stuff like that. But I became enamored with Brad and his older sister Leslie. I had a little bit of a crush on, and his older brother Chuck, and would go down and spend time with them, as much as I could. Well, we were in the same fifth grade class, but it was a pretty big fifth grade class. I didn't really know each other, but we seemed to click that day and started hanging out together. And Brad's older brother Chuck, I really kind of thought hung the sun, the moon, and the stars. He was older. He played instruments and he had a record collection and wore corduroy jackets with leather elbow pads and smoke bandaged cigarettes. And I just thought he was the coolest thing since sliced bread. And I think it was in the sixth grade that Brad and I both got into the band. Both played trumpet, and of course Chuck played trumpet as well, and started really getting into music and records. And I remember I'd go over and hang out, and we would just put on a record, after school, whatever the case may be. Put on a record, lay on the floor, reading album covers, looking at Rolling Stone magazine or whatever, and just listening to music. And those are some of my favorite memories from back in the day. Just having fun listening to music. The records that we would listen to would be things like The Doors and Alan Parsons and Yes, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Jethro Tull and Chicago, and also some singer-songwriter type stuff like Al Stewart, Past, Present, Future, Modern Times, You're the Cat, uh, Billy Joel, his first few albums, Piano Man, Street Life Serenade, and certainly Turnstiles, and then later on The Stranger. I mean, we'd sit there and listen to music, and I decided pretty quickly that I wanted my own record collection too, right? Because Brad would ask for records for Christmas, and he would get like five, six, seven, eight of them. You know, I remember the first time that I asked for records, and I think it was on a birthday. I don't think it was Christmas, but I asked my mom. I was like, "Mom, you think maybe I could get a couple of records for Christmas or something like that this year?" And my mom's a single mom and didn't have a whole lot of extra money, and I get that. Um, my mom never bought me any records, but she did tell my Aunt Dot, who was a good friend of the family, we called her Aunt Dot, that little Mark wanted some records, and bless her heart, she gave me a record for my birthday. It was my very first record that I owned. I didn't buy it, but it was the first record in my record collection, and that was the Fonzie's Greatest Hits. I had the Fonzie record. And man, by now I was considering myself a little more highbrow. I mean, I don't remember the record player or the stereo that Brad had. I don't remember the stereo that Chuck had. I do remember them having, I guess, a component system or whatever. They had a friend that lived down the street, Robbie, who he had a system. And I remember walking into his apartment for the first time and thinking, wow, he was listening to Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Brain Salad Surgery. And he had a nice system, and boy, it made a big difference. But by then I was pretty much hooked on records, and wanted to build a collection, and I started to. The very first stereo that I had was one that my sweet sister Jan bought me. Um, and it really, I mean, looking back, she did the best that she could with what she had. And she was so sweet to even think about it to begin with. But it was this little bitty junky thing with, speakers that separated from it, and a little built in turntable and da 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 da. But I used it, I listened to my records on it. I remember the first record, I started getting a little allowance. The first record that I bought with my own money uh, was Neil Diamond's Love at the Greek. So not long before that, Brad had gotten Hot August Night. And, Neil Diamond on the cover of Hot August Night looks really cool. I mean, there's Neil Diamond just a couple of years before. Um, on the band, the last waltz video with his blue leisure suit, and then here he is on the cover of this record, looking totally rock and roll. And we were kind of in a Neil Diamond mode, I guess, there for a few days or weeks or whatever. And I went out and I bought a Neil Diamond record. I picked it up in the record shop, Odyssey Records and Tapes in the Hoover Mall, and I picked it up, and it was Neil Diamond Love at the Greek. And I flipped it over and I looked at the song titles. It had Sweet Caroline, Song Sung Blue, and just a bunch of songs that we like. Neil Diamond's a great songwriter, deserves his place in the story. But got it home, put it on, realized instantly that it was a live record, and recorded at the Greek Theater, of course. And then also it had a certain amount of cheesiness built into it because on the record, Helen Reddy guests on one of the songs, and then the Fonz comes down to sing "Song Sung Blue" as the Fonz. So anyway, that was my first record that I bought with my own money. My second one was Jethro Tull, "Thick as a Brick." So I think I redeemed myself a little bit. But I just really want to say thank you to Brad. The thing about it is that um, we were in the band, and when I was in junior high back then, you could be one of three things. You could be a freak, you could be a jock, you could be a band kid. Brad had the chops to be a band kid, and he also had what I didn't have, which was discipline to actually practice his horn. And he learned how to read music theory. To read music, and music theory didn't kick his butt like it did mine. And he rose up in the ranks pretty good, whereas I was always going to be like fifth, sixth chair, right? Um, he gravitated more towards the band side of things, and I gravitated more towards the freak side of things. And unfortunately, we kind of grew apart. Now we've kept in touch all of these years. He lives in Japan now, and Brad ended up. That's not the end of the Brad story. Uh, I ended up getting into a little bit of trouble, got sent off to military school, came home after about a year or so, went to visit Brad, and things had changed. Now I'm the one with the short haircut, and he's the one with the longer hair, and he's picked up a natural finish blonde PV bass, and he's playing the bass. He's still playing the horn, but he's playing the bass now. He's got a Clash poster up in his music room, and I didn't know who the Clash were yet. And he's kind of moving into, I guess, this punk thing. And I was like, whoa, man, what is this? Because my jam had turned into Bad Company and Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and Rush and stuff like that. And so anyway, he ended up in a local band called Carnival Season. Check them out. They've got music out there that you can buy or download from back in the day. I guess the closest thing that they ever had to a single was Black Velvet Elvis. I played it for my wife not too long ago. She loved it, and it's a fun little song. From there, he moved up, ended up playing and touring and recording with Tommy Keene, and but even as Carnival Season, I think those guys went on a couple of pretty decent tours, opening up for bands like The Replacements and things like that. But I just can't even imagine that. But that's what a little bit of discipline will do for you, kids. It'll take you a long way. It certainly took him a long way. He ended up landing in Japan, and that's where he is today. And still playing music whenever and wherever he can. Brad Quinn, he's got a Discogs page. You can look him up. He's got several things that you can purchase, and just really, really cool stuff. So, uh, but Brad and I, grew apart. I ended up moving to Texas, and he ended up eventually moving to Japan. So anyway, thank you, Brad. Thank you, Chuck, who we lost a few years back. God rest your soul. I loved him so much. I got to see him at a Carnival Season reunion in Birmingham back in, I guess, 2007, 2008. and I got to tell him what he had really meant to me in an adult way. You can't really say things like that when you're kids, and ended up getting to tell Leslie about how the huge crush I'd had on her, and so anyway, hats off Quinn family, all of you. Thank you, Miss Sandra, for being so open to me crashing at your place and hanging out and eating your Totinos and drinking your cold Pepsis. So anyway, a wonderful time in my life. I moved on from that. Um, Ended up in a little bit of trouble and actually lost that first record collection. I'd gotten up to about 150, 175 records, and ended up losing those. Not sure what's going on with my wife's phone, but I just went black and white. But that actually looks kind of cool, so I'm just going to keep on talking. Um, I guess when I was about 18, uh, 19, got married. Started trying to kind of be a little bit more domestic and settle down and grow up a little bit, but got back into records pretty heavy. I'd say by the time I was about 27, 28 years old, probably had, 3 to 4 thousand records. Ended up getting into a little bit of a financial jam, and landlord, lawyer, owed a bunch of money to him, and there went those records. And by then, I had really kind of gotten into CDs. They were the latest, greatest, and had started, collecting CDs. And once CDs took off, the record company would release the CD, and where's the vinyl? It's just kind of the way that it was. So. Um, Along the way, a buddy of mine gave me a turntable, the same one I'm still using. I didn't have I can't remember what happened to it, but I lost the stereo along with the records. Um, and then not long after that, I had a buddy, Kerry Schuler, and we lost him not too long ago. And loved Kerry, and God rest your soul as well. He called me one day out of the blue and said, "Hey man, if you want some records, I'm trying to kind of spruce up and get rid of some stuff." And uh, he gave me, I guess, about 100 records, stuff like Leo Kottke and Leon Redbone and Pure Prairie League and Allman Brothers and, stuff like that. Uh, Went probably 4, 5, 6 years with a turntable and a box of records and nothing else. In 2016, my wife and family and I moved up to Decatur, Alabama. And my father in law, who lives right down the street, "Hey man, you want some records?" And he gave me some records, and I'm like, "Okay, I need to get a stereo." So I went down to Tom Sound in Birmingham, for you locals. Really sweet guy, ton of record equipment, ton of records. He's got a couple of recording rooms. I first found out about him. I rented some PA equipment from him. I used to DJ weddings and stuff like that, and so I drove down and hooked myself up with a receiver and some speakers, and uh, started over. So this collection that you see behind you and kind of below, I mean, this collection's about 6 years old. Okay. Um, I had a comment the other day. Hey, you should do a room show, walk through and show what equipment you're using and that type of thing. And I will do that. Matter of fact, I think I might make that my next video. But I knew in this one I'd be a little bit long-winded, and I appreciate you guys having patience with me as I just simply sit here talk and not show records. But that vinyl story and the connection to the Beatles and friends and family that you know uh, a record is not just a piece of music. It's cool. I mean, you think about it in terms of like a CD. People don't collect CDs; they buy CDs. Okay, but people collect records. You know, people that have records that are 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. Um, Record collections. You go, why do you need so many records? Well, it's like a library. Nobody ever asks, why do you need so many books, right? But a record, a vinyl record is just like a book, in that you can go back to it, you can get in the mood for it, and that might be brought on by a song that you hear, the weather that you're experiencing, the time of year that it is, whatever the case may be. We put on those records and they take us to a different and wonderful place, and we can either just enjoy that by ourselves or we can share that with our friends. So that basically, in a nutshell, is my vinyl story. It's why I've become a collector. It's a wonderful visual and audio piece of art that you can go back to again and again and again. And it's really fun. It doesn't have to be really expensive. That's why I'm doing this video, to let you guys know that it doesn't have to be about a particular pressing. It doesn't have to be about audiophile. It doesn't have to be about originals. It doesn't have to be about labels. It can really just be about the music and about the art and about our stories. And I sure appreciate you hanging out with me while I shared mine with you. That's my vinyl story. That's how I became a vinyl junkie slash collector. And I appreciate you hanging out with me and letting me tell it. Okay? We'll talk to y'all soon. In the meantime, have a great night and sleep good. We'll talk again. Take care. Bye.